Millionaire spied on the nanny, and what he discovered about his autistic son left him breathless. Used to being betrayed, he installed cameras to monitor every step of the new employee. But instead of suspicious behavior, he saw his autistic son smiling, reacting and trying to speak for the first time. And when he investigated who she was, he learned that his late wife had chosen her, even before she died. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing on, the mansion in Mayfair had always been imposing, but in recent years it had lost its shine. Not the shine of the crystal chandeliers that hung from the high ceilings, nor that of the imported marble staircases that snaked up to the second floor. It was another kind of light that had gone out there, the light that comes from people, the kind that warms a room even when the curtains are drawn. That light had been extinguished one October afternoon, and since then the house had breathed silence. Robert Anderson Thorne was 42 years old and had an empire built on foundations of steel and determination. The heir to one of the country's largest construction firms, he hadn't been content to merely manage his father's legacy. He had expanded the business, diversified investments, and made the Thorne name synonymous with excellence and power in London. But while he was erecting buildings that touched the clouds, he failed to notice that his own emotional foundation was crumbling in slow motion. Marina, his wife, had been the only person capable of breaking through the walls he had built around his heart. She laughed easily, spoke of hopes as if they were real things, and had a way of touching his face that made him forget about contracts, meetings, and numbers. She was the one who insisted they have a child, even when he argued that there was no time, that the world was too harsh, that the company demanded total dedication. Marina won through attrition, and Robert gave in because deep down he didn't know how to deny her anything. The pregnancy was planned, monitored, and celebrated. Robert hired the best doctors, prepared a nursery worthy of a magazine spread, and bought imported baby clothes. Everything was under control. Everything was on schedule, until life showed that schedules are only for paper, not for hearts. The delivery was difficult. Marina had to be rushed to the hospital on a rainy October dawn. Robert remembered the sound of the rain hitting the car window, the driver swerving around potholes on the M25, her hand squeezing his with a strength he never imagined she possessed. At the hospital, everything happened too fast and too slow at the same time. Doctors running, doors opening, bright lights, and then the cry of a baby, small, fragile, but alive. Robert held his son in his arms and felt a wave of something he couldn't name, fear perhaps, or responsibility, or love in its rawest form. But when he went back to see Marina, he found only silence. She had passed away during childbirth, taking the laughter, the hopes, the light with her. The doctors explained complications, hemorrhage, attempts. Robert heard it all like background noise. None of it made sense. Marina couldn't be gone. She was strong. She was the only certain thing in his life. In the months that followed, Robert plunged into a kind of darkness that no amount of money could buy a return ticket from. He worked 20-hour days, signed documents without reading them, and made decisions on autopilot. The baby, named Michael in honor of his paternal grandfather, was left in the care of an endless succession of nannies, nurses, and pediatricians. Robert could barely look at the boy. Every time he saw that little face, he remembered Marina. The price she had paid to bring that life into the world. Michael grew slowly. At 6 months, he still wasn't tracking objects with his eyes. At 1 year, he didn't try to speak, didn't reach out his arms, didn't seek to be held. The diagnosis of autism came as another weight in a backpack already full of stones. Robert hired specialists, therapists, professionals trained abroad. He did everything money allowed, but what money couldn't buy was his own willingness to be present, to sit on the floor and try to reach the boy who seemed to live inside a bubble. The suspicion began after one of the drivers was caught selling information about the house's routine to a competitor. Robert found out by chance through a wiretap he had ordered installed in the car. He fired the man on the spot and never trusted anyone the same way again. From then on, every new employee was a potential risk. Every gesture of kindness seemed to hide ulterior motives. The mansion, which once housed 15 employees, was reduced to just 5. And even those 5 were watched, monitored, investigated. When the 10th nanny resigned, claiming the atmosphere was too heavy, Robert wasn't even fazed. He called the same agency as always, requested a replacement with experience in special needs children, and locked himself back in his study. He didn't expect anything different. He didn't expect anything, period. It was Mrs. Celia, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for 20 years, who answered the door to the new employee. Robert heard the voices from the 2nd floor but didn't come down. He was in the middle of a video conference with Japanese investors and couldn't be interrupted. He only knew she had arrived when Celia knocked on his study door 3 hours later with a tray of coffee. "How's the new one, Celia?" he asked without taking his eyes off the computer screen. "Different, Mr. Thorne," the housekeeper replied with the careful manner of someone who knows her employer's moods. "Different how?" "I can't quite explain it. She has a calm way about her. And the boy didn't cry when she approached." Robert looked up. Michael always cried when someone new approached. Always. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I am." She crouched down in front of him without touching, without speaking loudly. She just stayed there. And after a while he looked at her. It was just for a second, but he looked. Robert felt a strange unease in his chest. He didn't know if it was relief or fear, maybe both. He said he would meet her later and went back to work. But for the rest of the afternoon, he found himself thinking about it. Michael had looked at someone. The boy who lived with his head down, who avoided any kind of contact, had looked at a stranger. That evening, when he finally came down for dinner, Robert found Michael sitting on the living room rug. This wasn't unusual. The boy spent hours there, playing with the same 3 wooden cars, lining them up in an order. Only he understood. What was unusual was the presence of someone sitting beside him, at a respectful distance, just watching. Robert stopped at the doorway and watched. The woman must have been in her early 30s, with brown hair tied in a simple bun, discreet clothes, no makeup. There was something about her that bothered him, but he couldn't define what. Perhaps it was the excessive tranquility, or the way she looked at Michael, not with pity or impatience, but with something close to respect. "You're the new nanny," he said, and his voice came out harsher than he intended. She stood up slowly without being startled. "Yes, I am. My name is Helen Fisher." Robert nodded, analyzing every detail. She didn't look away, but she also didn't try to make small talk. She didn't smile too much or ask questions about the house. She just waited, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mrs. Celia said Michael looked at you." "Yes, he did." "That doesn't happen." "I know. I read the file the agency gave me. He has moderate autism, avoids eye contact, has hypersensitivity to loud noises, and a preference for rigid routines." Robert frowned. Most nannies memorized basic information, but she seemed to have genuinely studied it. "And what did you do to make him look?" "Nothing. I just waited." "Waited?" "Yes. Children with autism don't like to be pressured. The more you try to force contact, the more they withdraw. So I just stayed there quietly, letting him decide whether or not he wanted to notice my presence." Robert didn't know what to say. It made sense, but at the same time, it sounded too simple. He had hired the best specialists, professionals with doctorates, renowned therapists, and none of them had achieved what this woman had in a few hours. "Do you have experience with autistic children?" he asked, suspicious. "I do. I worked for 2 years at a clinic specializing in child development, right here in London. Before that, I did an internship at King's College Hospital." "Is that documented?" "Yes, it is. The agency has everything." Robert made a vague gesture with his hand, indicating that she could go back to what she was doing. Helen nodded and sat down on the rug again, maintaining the same distance from Michael. The boy continued to play, oblivious to everything, but Robert noticed that, from time to time, he would give a quick glance in her direction. Brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Over the following days, Robert observed Helen with the attention of someone examining a risky investment. She always arrived on time, was never late, never left before her shift ended. She cared for Michael with a patience that bordered on superhuman. She didn't force him to eat when he rejected food, but offered alternatives until she found something he would accept. She didn't try to hug him or hold him, but she stayed nearby, a constant and serene presence. But the strangest thing was that Michael began to respond. Small signs, almost nothing to an outsider, but everything to someone who knew the boy. He started looking at Helen more frequently. Once, he imitated a clapping motion she made. And on a Thursday afternoon, for the first time in his short life, Michael smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a slight curve at the corners of his mouth. But it was real. And it was for Helen. Robert saw it all through the security cameras he had installed throughout the house. He had always known they were necessary, after the incident with the driver, and before that with the housekeeper who stole jewelry, and even before that with the gardener who planned a kidnapping. Robert had learned that surveillance wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Every room had at least 2 cameras, hidden in lamps, clocks, paintings. No one knew, not even Mrs. Celia, who was trustworthy, but trust had its limits. He watched the recordings every night in his study after everyone had gone to bed. He saw Helen bathing Michael, changing his clothes, combing his fine hair with care. He saw her singing softly while preparing his snack, arranging the toys in the order the boy demanded, waiting patiently when he had a meltdown and threw himself on the floor. There was nothing wrong, nothing suspicious, and for that very reason, Robert was suspicious. No one is like that, he thought. No one is so dedicated, so patient, so genuine without wanting something in return. She's waiting for the right moment. She's gaining trust to act later. But the days passed, and nothing happened. Helen remained just Helen. Punctual, discreet, efficient. And Michael continued to improve. He was already trying to make sounds, something between babbling and incomplete words. He clapped his hands when he was happy. He looked for Helen with his eyes when she left the room. It was progress that the best therapists hadn't achieved in months. It was on a Saturday afternoon that Robert noticed something different. He was in his study, reviewing financial reports, when he glanced at the monitor showing the living room. Helen was there, but not with Michael. The boy was asleep on the sofa, covered with a blanket, and she was standing in front of the shelf of old photographs, the ones Robert never had the courage to take down. Even after Marina was gone, there were photos of his childhood, his wedding, his travels, and there were old photos, very old, from the time when his father was still alive. Helen picked up one of those photos, a black and white one where the family patriarch, Michael Thorne Sr., appeared next to his wife at a Christmas party. Robert watched as Helen ran her fingers over the frame, slowly, like someone touching something sacred, and then he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. She brought the photograph to her lips and kissed it. Robert felt his blood boil. That wasn't normal. That wasn't just curiosity or admiration. There was intimacy in that gesture, knowledge, familiarity. He saved the video, noted the exact time in the file description, and decided he needed to investigate further. On Monday, when Helen left for her weekly day off, Robert asked Mrs. Celia to check her belongings. The housekeeper hesitated but obeyed. She brought Helen's handbag to the study, and Robert rummaged through everything. Wallet, documents, keys, a small notebook with notes on Michael's routine, an old lipstick, tissues, and then, at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth, a silver locket. Robert opened the locket with trembling hands. Inside was a small photograph faded with time, and in it, impossible, improbable, but real, was his father. Michael Thorne Sr., in his 30s, with his arm around a woman Robert had never seen before. The photo was intimate, informal, taken somewhere that looked like a park or garden, and on the back of the locket, engraved in tiny letters, was a date. December 1978. Robert sat down heavily in his chair. His hands were cold and sweaty. His heart was racing. That photo didn't make sense. His father had died. 15 years ago had always been a serious man, dedicated to his family and business. There had never been scandals, never even rumors, and now a stranger had appeared in his house, caring for his grandson, carrying a photograph that shouldn't exist. Robert picked up the phone and dialed the number for Arthur, his lawyer and personal advisor for over 20 years. The man had served the Thorns since Robert's father's time, knew all the family's secrets, all the legal strategies, all the skeletons in the closets. If anyone could explain this, it was him. "Arthur, I need you to investigate someone for me. A woman named Helen Fisher. I want to know everything, where she was born, where she studied, where she worked, who she associates with, if she has debts, if she has a police record, everything, and I want it yesterday." On the other end of the line, Arthur asked a few technical questions, noted the full name, the national insurance number from her employment records. He promised results in 48 hours. Robert hung up and stared at the locket. Something was happening, something involving the past, secrets, hidden connections, and Helen Fisher, with her infuriating calm and overly affectionate gestures, was at the center of it all. He needed to find out what she wanted before it was too late. Meanwhile, life in the mansion continued its course. Michael kept progressing. He could now sit at the table for the entire dinner, something unprecedented. He had started to imitate sounds Helen made, little clicks with her tongue, soft whistles. And on that week's Thursday, something happened that Robert would never forget. He was coming down the stairs when he heard music. It wasn't the radio or the television. It was a female voice, low and melodious, singing an old song. Robert recognized the tune immediately. It was a lullaby his mother used to sing when he was a child. An old English lullaby, full of verses about moonlight and stars and dreams. He hadn't heard it in at least 30 years. He stopped midway down the stairs and listened. The voice was coming from the living room. It was Helen, singing to Michael as she rocked him in her arms. The boy, who never accepted being held by anyone, was relaxed, almost asleep, his head resting on her shoulder. And Helen sang as if she knew, every word, every pause, every intonation. "How do you know that song?" Robert asked, his voice rough. Helen looked up without stopping her rocking. "I learned it as a child," she replied simply. "Where?" "From my mother." "Your mother knew how to sing that?" "She did. She sang it all the time." Robert descended the rest of the stairs and stood in front of her. "And where did your mother learn it? That's not a common song. It's very old. Not everyone knows it." Helen held his gaze for a second too long, then she looked away and turned her attention back to Michael. "My mother worked in family homes her whole life. I suppose she learned it from someone somewhere. I don't know the details." Robert didn't believe her. There was something in the way she sang, in the perfection of each verse, that indicated a true intimacy with that song. It wasn't something you learn by osmosis. It was heritage. It was memory passed down from generation to generation. He went back to his study and wrote it all down. The song, the date, the time. Another piece of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape, but whose final image was still a mystery. And the more he discovered about Helen Fisher, the more questions arose. Who was she really? What did she want? And why, of all the houses in London, had she chosen his? The answer would come. Arthur was efficient, and when it came, Robert would be ready to act. No one fooled a Thorn twice. But while he waited, while the investigation ran in parallel, something began to change inside him. Something small, almost imperceptible. Every night, while watching the recordings, Robert found himself observing not just Helen, but Michael, the son he barely knew, the boy he avoided looking at because it hurt too much. And in the footage he saw a different Michael, a Michael who smiled, who responded, who tried. A Michael who was waking up, and the woman responsible for this, the stranger who carried secrets in silver lockets and sang forgotten songs, was there every night with a patience Robert had never been able to muster. She did everything without asking for anything in return, without complaining, without tiring, as if caring for that boy was more than a job, as if it were a calling. Robert shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. He couldn't be fooled by appearances. He had made that mistake before. He had trusted people who seemed sincere, and all of them, without exception, had shown their true colors at the right moment. Helen would be just another one. She had to be, because the alternative, the possibility that she was genuinely good, genuinely dedicated, was too frightening. It would mean that he, Robert Anderson Thorn, the man who had built an empire, who dominated boardrooms and intimidated competitors, was incapable of doing what a stranger could do with ease: loving his own son. The results of the investigation arrived on a rainy Tuesday, inside a brown envelope that Arthur delivered personally. Robert dismissed the lawyer at the door, saying he preferred to read it alone, and locked himself in his study with a bottle of whiskey and the dossier on Helen Fisher. The first few pages contained basic information. Helen was 34, born in Slough, daughter of Mary Fisher, deceased 8 years ago. Father unknown, never mentioned on the birth certificate. She had attended a state school, graduated as a nursing technician with a government grant, worked at King's College Hospital for 3 years before moving into home care. Clean record, no significant debts, no lawsuits, no apparent vices. An ordinary life, almost monotonous. But it was on page 7 that Robert found what he was looking for. A footnote, almost hidden among technical paragraphs, mentioned that Mary Fisher had worked as a domestic helper in several residences in West London between 1975 and 1992. And among those residences was the address of the old Thorne mansion in Richmond, where Robert had grown up before building his own house in Mayfair. Robert read and reread that line. Mary Fisher had worked for his father. She had known the family. She had lived inside that house, witnessed the dinners, the parties, the business meetings. And now her daughter was here, decades later, caring for her former employer's grandson. The coincidence was too great to be mere coincidence. He picked up the phone and called Arthur again. "I want to know more about this Mary Fisher, why she left my parents' house, what happened, if there was any problem, any dismissal, any accusation." Arthur promised to deepen the investigation, but warned that records from that time were scarce. Many domestic helpers worked off the books, without formal documentation. It would be difficult to find details, Robert insisted. He wanted answers. He needed to understand what Helen was seeking there. While he waited, Robert's behavior toward Helen changed. He began to ask more direct questions, to test her reactions. He asked about her family, her childhood, her mother. Helen always answered with the same tranquility, hiding nothing, but also offering no more information than necessary. She said her mother had been a hard-working, honest woman who had raised her daughter alone with great sacrifice, that she had died of heart complications without prolonged suffering, that she had left few possessions but a lot of love. Robert noticed the genuine pain in her voice when she spoke of her mother, but he also noticed the caution. Helen chose her words, measured her pauses. There were things she wasn't saying, secrets carefully guarded. Michael, oblivious to all the tension, continued to blossom. In Helen's 3rd week at the house, he took his first step. It was on a sunny morning, on the back terrace. Helen was crouching a few feet away from him, arms outstretched, encouraging him with soft words. And Michael, after hesitating, after looking at his own feet as if he didn't trust them, took a step, then another, and another, until he fell into her arms, laughing. Mrs. Celia watched it all with tears in her eyes and ran to tell Robert, who had been locked in his study for hours. "Mr. Thorne, the boy walked," she shouted before even knocking on the door. "Michael walked." Robert jumped to his feet, knocking over papers. He ran to the terrace and found Helen holding Michael, both of them laughing, and the boy clapping his hands excitedly. For a moment, just a moment, Robert felt something beyond suspicion. He felt pride. He felt tenderness. He felt the urge to hug his son and thank the woman who had achieved the impossible. But then he remembered the locket, the photograph, the old song, and the suspicion returned, stronger, contaminating any pure feeling that tried to sprout. "Congratulations," he said, and his voice came out cold. "You've achieved what the specialists couldn't." Helen looked at him, and for the first time Robert saw something different in her face. It wasn't hurt, it wasn't anger. It was disappointment, as if she had expected a different reaction, as if she knew he should be happy but wasn't. "He did it on his own, Mr. Thorne. I just waited until he was ready." Robert nodded, turned around and went back to his study. He locked the door, leaned his forehead against the cool wood, and took a deep breath. There was something wrong with him. He knew it. Any normal father would have celebrated that moment, would have picked up his son, would have called friends and relatives to share the achievement. But he couldn't. He couldn't because every one of Michael's victories felt like a defeat for him. It proved that he, the biological father, was unnecessary, that a stranger could do more in weeks than he had in years. That night, watching the day's recordings, Robert saw something that disturbed him. Helen was bathing Michael, humming that same old song, when the boy made a gesture with his hands, a specific movement opening and closing his fingers, and Helen reacted instantly, repeating the gesture back. They were communicating. They had their own silent language, which excluded everyone else. Robert turned up the volume on the recording, trying to catch every word Helen murmured, and then he heard it. It was quick, almost inaudible, but it was there. Helen whispered a name as she wrapped Michael in a towel, a name Robert never expected to hear again. Marina. She had said Marina. She spoke the name of his departed wife as if she knew her, as if she had the right to mention that sacred name aloud. Robert felt rage rise in his throat like bile. He stopped the recording, rewound it, listened again. There was no doubt. Helen had said Marina's name to Michael. Why? What did that mean? The next morning, Robert confronted Helen directly for the first time. He waited until Michael was down for his afternoon nap and went to the kitchen where she was preparing a snack. Why did you mention Marina last night? Helen stopped cutting fruit and looked at him. Her face showed no surprise. It was as if she knew he watched everything, recorded everything, and didn't care. Because Michael needs to know who his mother was. He doesn't understand that yet. He's too young. He has autism. He understands more than you imagine. Children sense absence even when they don't have the words to name it. And who gave you permission to talk about my wife with my son? Robert's voice was low, dangerous, but Helen didn't back down. No one gave me permission, but someone asked me. Robert felt the floor disappear from under his feet. What? Your wife asked me, at the hospital, the day Michael was born. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Robert stared at Helen as if she had uttered a blasphemy. You didn't know Marina? Yes, I did. I was a nursing technician at St. Thomas's Hospital that day. I was there for the birth. I stayed with her until the end. Robert had to hold onto the kitchen counter. His legs felt weak. His breath was short. She was there. This woman, now cutting fruit in his kitchen, had been in the room when Marina passed. She had seen everything, heard everything. She asked you to take care of Michael, he said, more a statement than a question. She did. Those were her last words. She held my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, take care of my son if I don't make it. It wasn't a casual request. It was a mother's plea, a plea I swore to fulfill. Robert staggered back. This doesn't make sense. Why would she ask you, a stranger, a hospital employee? Helen placed the knife on the cutting board, slowly, and faced Robert with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Because she knew who I was. She recognized my surname when I introduced myself. Fisher, the same as Mary Fisher, who worked for your father for 17 years. Marina knew the story. She knew my mother had been helped by the Thorne family when she fell ill. She knew about the debt that was never repaid. And in the most difficult moment of her life, when she knew she might not survive, she looked for someone she could trust, someone who had a real reason to protect her son. Robert had to sit down. The information was coming too fast, disorganized, impossible to process. Marina knew. Marina knew the story, and she had never told him. Why? What else had she hidden? Tell me everything, he ordered, his voice hoarse. From the beginning. Helen took a deep breath, like someone preparing for a deep dive. Then she began. My mother started working for your father in 1975. She was 19, had just arrived from Yorkshire with no family, no references, nothing. Your father, Mr. Michael Thorne, was known for being demanding but fair. He hired her even without experience, said he'd give her a chance. And my mother seized it. She worked hard, learned quickly, and earned the family's trust. Robert listened, but his mind drifted to old memories. He remembered a woman in the house in the 80s, a young woman with a shy smile who made sure his school uniform was always impeccable. Mary. They just called her Mary. He never knew her last name. When I was born, in '83, my mother had been working in the house for 8 years. Your father was my godfather, not officially because it would have been improper at the time, but he paid for the party, bought my layette, was present at the church. My mother said he was a good man, different from the other employers she had known. Why did she leave? Robert asked. She got sick. In '91, a heart problem. She needed urgent surgery, expensive treatment, imported medicine. Your father paid for everything. He insisted she take time off work until she had fully recovered, and when she got better, he offered for her to come back, but my mother chose not to. She said she had already taken too much from the family, that she needed to move on with her own life. But before she left, your father gave her this locket. Helen took the silver locket Robert had found from her apron pocket. She opened it and showed him the photograph. This is your father with my mother at a Christmas barbecue at the house. 1978. The whole family was there, the staff, friends. It was a happy day. My mother kept this photo her whole life. And when she died, she left me the locket with a request. If the Thorne family ever needs help, you help them. No matter what, you help them. Robert looked at the photograph. He saw his young father, smiling in a way he barely remembered. He saw the genuine happiness on their faces. And he understood it wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't a scam. It was a debt of gratitude being paid a generation later. And you came to work here because, he asked, still resisting the idea of innocence. Because when I was at the hospital, I recognized the name Thorne on the chart. After the birth, after everything happened and your wife made her request, I became obsessed with knowing if the baby was okay, if the family was okay. I looked for news, asked colleagues. And then I found out about the autism diagnosis, about the difficulties, about the fact that you couldn't connect with your own son. And I decided it was time, that I needed to fulfill both promises, to honor my mother's memory and to protect Michael, as Marina asked me to. Robert was silent for a long minute, processing, re-evaluating, reconstructing everything he had thought about Helen, about her intentions, about the truth. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? He asked, and for the first time his voice was without aggression. Because you wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I was making up a story to get close. You would have sent me away before I had the chance to prove I came for the right reason. I needed you to see Michael improve, to see that I wanted nothing more than to help. Only then would the truth have weight. And it did, it had weight. Robert felt the weight of that truth pressing on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He had made a mistake, a huge mistake, based on suspicion, paranoia, and fear. He had pushed away the only person who had truly managed to reach Michael. And why? Because he couldn't believe that kindness existed without ulterior motives. But before Robert could say anything, before he could apologize or thank her or make any gesture of reconciliation, the doorbell rang. It was Arthur, the lawyer, with more documents, more information. And this time his face was serious in a different way. Robert, we need to talk, in private. Robert looked at Helen, then at Arthur, and felt his stomach tighten. He went up to the study with the lawyer and closed the door. Arthur opened a new folder and placed papers on the desk. I found more information about Mary Fisher and about Helen, and Robert, you need to fire this woman immediately. Why? Because she has a history. She has worked in 3 other wealthy family homes in the last 5 years, always with children, and always with exceptional results. So much so that in 2 of those houses the families tried to adopt her as part of the family. They offered money, assets, positions. She refused everything but always left with recommendations and contacts. It's a pattern, Robert. She gets close, gains trust, creates bonds, and then uses it to get what she wants. And what does she want? I don't know yet, but I know she's dangerous. She knows how to manipulate emotions. She knows how to touch the right wounds. And you're vulnerable. You're alone, you're isolated, you're starved for a connection with your own son. She saw that and she's exploiting it. It's what they do. Robert heard it all, but something in him resisted. He had seen the videos. He had seen the patience, the dedication, the genuine affection. Arthur hadn't been there. He hadn't seen Michael walk for the first time. He hadn't heard the story of Marina in the hospital. He only saw numbers, patterns, cold statistics. "Do you have concrete proof that she's done anything wrong?" Robert asked. "Not legal proof, but I have enough to say you're taking a risk. And considering everything you've been through, all the people who have tried to deceive you, it's not worth the risk. Fire her, Robert, now." Robert thought of Michael, of the boy's smile, the first steps, the clapping, the progress no therapist had achieved, and he thought of Marina in the hospital asking for help, trusting Helen when she needed someone most. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Arthur sighed, frustrated. "You're making a mistake. But if that's what you want, at least install more cameras. Monitor everything. Don't give her any openings." "I already do." "Then do more. Because if she's planning something, she'll act soon. They always do." After Arthur left, Robert stayed alone in his study late into the night. He read and reread the documents. He analyzed every detail of Helen's life. And the more he read, the more he realized there were two possible versions of the same story. In the first, Helen was a sophisticated opportunist who used empathy and real skills to manipulate wealthy families. In the second, she was just a good woman who took her promises seriously and had a natural gift for dealing with special needs children. Which one was true? Robert didn't know. And this uncertainty gnawed at him, because for the first time in years he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that kindness existed without calculation, that someone could help without expecting anything in return, that Helen was real. But believing meant taking a risk. It meant opening doors he had sworn to keep locked. It meant trusting. And trust, for Robert Anderson Thorne, was the most expensive currency in the world. The decision came on a Friday. Robert woke up with the certainty that he needed to act, and acting meant sending Helen away before it was too late. Arthur was right. He was vulnerable, he was getting involved, he was letting emotions cloud his judgment. He couldn't make that mistake. Not again. He waited until late afternoon when Michael was sleeping and the house was sinking into that heavy silence that precedes a storm. He called Helen to the study and closed the door. She entered with the same tranquility as always, but Robert noticed something different in her eyes. A preparedness, as if she knew what was coming. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair opposite his desk. Helen sat, her hands folded in her lap. Robert remained standing on the other side of the desk, maintaining the physical distance he needed to not waver. "I'm going to have to let you go," he said bluntly. "I appreciate the work you've done with Michael, but we can't continue." Helen didn't react immediately. She just stared at him for a long moment. "May I know why?" "I have my reasons. Reasons that involve the investigation you had conducted on me." It wasn't a question. Helen knew. She had always known. Robert felt a discomfort creep up his neck. "Yes," he admitted. "And I found out you have a history. You've worked in other houses, always with wealthy families, always creating strong bonds, and always leaving with benefits. Benefits like recommendations, like professional references, like the satisfaction of having done a good job. Is that what you call benefits? You refused adoption offers from 2 different families. Why? If you really cared about those families, why didn't you stay? Because it wasn't my place. I am a professional, Mr. Thorne. I help children who need it. I do my job with dedication, and when my job is done, I leave. I don't stay because they pay me more. I don't stay because they offer me status. I stay only as long as I am needed. And you think you're no longer needed here. I think you're afraid that I am needed. That's the problem." The sentence hit Robert hard. He opened his mouth to retort, but found no words. Helen was right. The fear wasn't that she was an opportunist. The fear was that she was real, that he needed her, that Michael needed her, that admitting it meant accepting his own inability to be the father he was supposed to be. "Michael walked for the first time with you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Not with me, with you. He smiled at you. He looks for you with his eyes. He calls for you. And I'm just the man who lives in the same house, the man who sleeps upstairs while you two build a world of your own downstairs. Helen rose slowly and walked until she was closer to Robert. Not close enough to invade his space, but close enough for him to feel her presence. Michael doesn't have to choose between us, Mr. Thorne. He needs both of us. But for that, you need to be present. Not physically, you already are. You need to be emotionally present. You allow yourself to be a father, with all the imperfections, all the fears, all the uncertainties, because a child with autism doesn't need perfection. They need consistency. They need someone who is there, every day, trying, even when they get it wrong, even when they don't know what to do. Robert looked away. He couldn't face those eyes that saw too much, that saw the wounds he hid so well from others. I don't know how to be his father. I try, but I don't know how. No one knows at the beginning. We learn by doing, by making mistakes, by trying again. Your wife knew that. That's why she asked me to help. Not to replace her, not to replace you, but to be a bridge, to be there in the most difficult moments, to hold Michael's hand when you still couldn't, to give you time, because you were going to need time, to process the grief, to learn to look at your son without seeing the loss. And that time is running out, Mr. Thorne. Michael is ready. The question is, are you? Robert sat heavily in his chair. He ran his hands over his face, rubbed his eyes, tried to control his ragged breathing. There was something inside him wanting to get out, a scream stuck in his throat for 2 years, since that night in the hospital when he lost Marina and gained Michael, and didn't know how to deal with either. She was everything to me, he said, almost in a whisper, and when she was gone, she took everything with her. There was nothing left, just this huge emptiness and a child I didn't know if I could love the way he deserved to be loved. And now I look at Michael, I see that he's happy for the first time, that he's progressing, that he's becoming a person. And I know it's not because of me, it's because of you. And that kills me, Helen. It kills me because it proves I'm replaceable, that anyone with patience and affection can do what I can't. Helen knelt beside Robert's chair, forcing him to look at her. You are not replaceable. You are irreplaceable. Because as much as I love Michael, and I do, I am not his mother. I am not his father. I am a caregiver, a teacher, a friend. But at the end of the day, when I go home, you're the one who stays. It's your voice he hears before he sleeps. It's your scent he recognizes. It's your presence that will shape who he becomes. Don't throw that away out of fear. Don't waste the chance to know your son. Robert looked at Helen and saw tears in her eyes, real tears from someone who genuinely cared, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe. He allowed himself to trust. Teach me, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Teach me how to reach him. Helen smiled through her tears. I already am, you just need to pay attention. She stayed. Robert didn't fire her, but something changed between them that day. Suspicion gave way to an unlikely partnership. Helen showed Robert how to interpret Michael's signals, how to respect his boundaries, how to offer affection in a way the boy could receive, and Robert, for the first time, allowed himself to make mistakes. He allowed himself to sit on the floor and play without knowing the rules. He allowed himself to be rejected when Michael didn't want contact and to try again the next day. It was slow. It was difficult. But it happened. Michael started to look at Robert more often. He started to imitate some of his gestures. And on a Sunday afternoon, while the three of them were in the garden, Michael walked over to Robert and placed his small hand in his. It was a brief touch, almost accidental, but it was intentional, and Robert felt as if his heart, numb for so long, had started beating again. But the peace was short-lived, because 3 weeks after that moment in the study, when Robert was beginning to believe that perhaps he could rebuild, his brother showed up. Marcus Thorne was 46 and had a history of accumulated resentments. He was the son of his father's first marriage, while Robert was from the second. There had always been a rivalry, but it had intensified after the patriarch's death, when the will divided the inheritance unevenly. Robert got the construction company, the family's core business. Marcus received investments, properties, smaller stakes. To an outsider, It was a fortune. To Marcus, it was an affront. He appeared unannounced on a Monday morning, driving a red convertible and wearing a suit that screamed money and insecurity. Robert was in his study when Mrs. Celia announced the visitor. He came down reluctantly. He hadn't spoken to Marcus in months, not since their last fight over dividends. "Good to see you, brother," Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About this whole situation. I hear you have a new employee. A Helen something." Robert felt his muscles tense. So I did some research on her, and I don't like what I found." Marcus opened a folder and began to spread papers across the living room table. They were the same documents Arthur had brought, but arranged differently. More incriminating, more suspicious. "This woman worked in 3 houses before yours. In all of them, there were problems after she left. One family ended up in a legal battle over adoption. Another had a case of parental alienation. The third simply fell apart. Divorce, fights, chaos. And now she's here, taking care of your son, the heir to the Thorne family. Don't you find that strange?" "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to protect you. We're brothers, Robert. Despite everything, we're blood. And I can't stand by and watch you fall into a trap." "It's not a trap. Helen is a competent professional who is helping Michael." "Oh, is she? And do you happen to know that her mother worked here, that Dad helped her, that she has an emotional debt to the family? Doesn't that seem a bit too convenient? She shows up just when you're vulnerable, when Michael needs special care, when you're alone and desperate." Robert clenched his fists. "Watch what you say. I'm telling the truth. And the truth is, you're being manipulated. This woman knows exactly what she's doing. She's creating dependency. She's making you and Michael attached to her. And when she has enough control, she'll ask for something. Money, a stake in the company, legal recognition as Michael's mother. Something, because they always ask." Robert stood up, furious. "Get out of my house, now!" Marcus stood up too, but maintained a calm, almost condescending tone. "I'm going, but think about what I said. And if you need help, if you want me to take over some of your business while you sort this out, you can count on me. After all, family is family." That's when Robert understood. It wasn't about protection. It was about opportunity. Marcus saw an opening, a chance to question Robert's ability to lead the company, to care for the heir, to maintain the family empire. If he could prove that Robert was being manipulated, emotionally unstable, incapable of making rational decisions, he could demand a re-evaluation of the power structure. He could try to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Marcus left, but he left the papers on the table, and Robert, alone in the room, looked at those documents and felt the doubt return. What if Marcus was right? What if he was being manipulated and didn't realize it? What if Helen, with all her apparent kindness, was just very good at faking it? He went up to Michael's room and watched the boy sleep. The peaceful little face, the messy curls, the small hands relaxed on his chest. His son, his responsibility. And he couldn't get this wrong. Not this. Not him. That night, Robert called Helen to the study again. This time his tone was different, colder, more distant, back to how it was before. "My brother was here today. He brought information about you. I imagined something like this would happen," Helen said calmly. "Your family has resources. It was a matter of time before someone decided to dig deeper. And you don't think you should have told me everything from the beginning, about the other houses, about the problems that happened after you left." There were no problems because of me. In any of those houses, there were problems because families are complicated, because marriages were already falling apart before I arrived, because children have needs that parents don't always know how to meet. I did my job in each of those houses, and when my job was done, I left. Simple as that. My brother thinks you're manipulating me, that you're creating dependency to ask for something in return later. And you? What do you think? Robert hesitated, because the truth was he didn't know anymore. He wanted to believe Helen. But the fear was stronger, the fear of being wrong, the fear of putting Michael at risk, The fear of allowing himself to trust and then discovering he had trusted the wrong person. "I think I need guarantees," he said finally. "I need to know you won't try anything, that you won't sue for custody, that you won't claim maternal rights, that you won't use your bond with Michael to gain something." Helen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was low but firm. "I'm leaving." "What?" "I'm leaving. Because if you need me to sign papers, to give guarantees, to prove my honesty through contracts, then nothing I say will change your mind. You don't trust me. And without trust, I can't do my job. Michael needs people who are there by choice, not by legal obligation. So I'm leaving. First thing tomorrow." "No, wait. There's nothing to wait for, Mr. Thorne. You're right to be cautious. You're right to protect your son, but I can't stay in a place where I'm seen as a threat, where my every gesture is interpreted as a calculation, where my affection is questioned. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to Michael." She left the study before Robert could reply, and he was left there, alone, with the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, Helen packed her bags. Mrs. Celia cried, begged her to stay, but Helen was firm. She said it was for the best, that Robert needed time to understand what he wanted, and that Michael, despite everything, would be fine, because now he had a father who was learning to truly see him. When she left, carrying only a small suitcase and the silver locket, Robert was in his study looking out the window. He watched the taxi drive away. He saw the dust rise from the road, and he felt something inside him shatter. Michael noticed her absence immediately. He looked for Helen all over the house, cried when he couldn't find her, and regressed. He stopped eating properly, he stopped playing, he stopped smiling, and Robert for the first time had to deal with his son alone. No intermediaries, no safety net, no Helen. It was the worst and the best thing that could have happened, because in the pain, in the difficulty, in the exhaustion of trying to soothe the son who wouldn't stop crying, Robert finally understood. He understood that being a father wasn't about doing everything right. It was about being present. It was about trying even when you didn't know how. It was about loving even when love hurt, and Michael, even in his anguish, even in his regression, was still his son. He still needed him, not Helen, not anyone else. Him. 2 weeks. That's how long Robert lasted, before admitting he had made an irreparable mistake. 2 weeks of trying to be both father and mother, trying to understand Michael's signals, trying to calm him when the meltdowns came. 2 weeks of sleeping 3 hours a night, waking up to his son crying, looking for Helen in every corner of the house. 2 weeks in which the mansion returned to what it had always been, a beautiful empty prison. It was Mrs. Celia who found him on the floor of Michael's room on a Thursday dawn, holding his son in his arms while they both cried. The boy from exhaustion and confusion, Robert from guilt and desperation. The housekeeper said nothing. She just sat down beside them and stayed there, a silent presence that said, "It's okay to make mistakes, it's okay not to know, it's okay to ask for help." When Michael finally fell asleep, Celia helped Robert put him to bed, and they went down to the kitchen. She made coffee, strong the way he liked it, and served it with freshly baked scones she had taken from the freezer. They ate in silence for a few minutes until Robert broke. "I've ruined everything, Celia. I sent away the only person who could get through to him." "You didn't send her away, Mr. Thorne. She left because you were afraid, and fear isn't a crime, it's just something we have to face. How do I face this? How do I trust anyone after so many people have deceived me?" "By trusting. It's the only way. You keep analyzing, researching, putting up cameras, investigating, trying to protect yourself from everything. But too much protection becomes a prison. And you're trapped, Mr. Thorne, trapped inside this house, inside this fear, inside this pain that won't go away because you won't let it. Mrs. Marina is gone. She's gone, and she's not coming back. But she left Michael. And you're here too. And Helen was trying to build a bridge between the two of you, but you were afraid of the bridge. You thought it would collapse. And so you broke the bridge yourself." Robert ran his hands over his face. Celia was right. She always was. She was the most sensible person he knew, which was precisely why he rarely truly listened to her. I don't know where she is. I do. She's staying in the same area, in a boarding house. Spends her days looking for a job. I called her twice. Asked how she was, if she needed anything. She said she's fine. But I know when someone's lying. She's not fine. She's hurting just as much as you are. Just as much as the boy. Give me the address. Celia wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to Robert. Then she looked at him with the firmness of someone who had raised 2 children on her own and knew about life. When you go there, don't go with a prepared speech. Don't go with an offer of money or a new contract. Go with the truth. Go with an open heart, because that's what she deserves. That's what Michael deserves, and that's what you deserve too. Robert nodded, put the paper in his pocket and went back to his study. But he didn't go to sleep. He went to the archive his father had left, the one he rarely opened because going through the patriarch's things always hurt. In a specific way. He searched through old folders, yellowed envelopes, documents from decades ago, and he found it. It was a letter, handwritten on company letterhead, dated December 1992. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm and elegant, the way Michael Thorne Sr. wrote everything. And the content was both a declaration and a request. The letter said that Mary Fisher had been more than an employee. She had been a friend, a person of absolute trust who had cared for the house as if it were her own, for the family as if they were her own, and who, when she fell ill, had proven that dignity and gratitude do not depend on social class. It said that he, Michael Thorne, had a moral debt to that woman and her daughter, and that if ever, at some future time, Helen Fisher needed anything at all, the Thorne family should help without hesitation, not out of charity, out of justice. There was more. A second letter, this one undated, which seemed to have been written shortly before the patriarch passed away. In it, he spoke of legacy, of how a man is remembered not for the money he accumulates, but for the lives he touches, of how the greatest wealth is not in vaults but in the ability to extend a hand when someone falls. And it ended with a sentence that Robert read and reread until he had memorized it. If you are reading this, son, it is because I am already gone. And if you are looking for answers, know that the answer is always in doing what is right, not what is easy. Trust the right people, protect the right people, love the right people, and let them love you back. That is all that matters in the end. Robert folded the letters carefully and put them away. He looked at the clock. 5 in the morning. Celia was asleep in her room. Michael was asleep upstairs. The house breathed that stillness that comes before the dawn, and Robert, for the first time in a long time, knew exactly what he had to do. He showered, dressed in simple clothes, left a note for Celia saying he was going out and to look after Michael, and he went. He drove through the empty streets of London until he reached the neighbourhood Celia had indicated. A modest area, in the East End, far from Mayfair, far from the bubble of luxury where he lived. He found the boarding house, an old 3-story building, and rang the bell. A woman in her 60s answered, suspicious. "I'm looking for Helen Fisher. She's on the 2nd floor, flat 23, but it's too early for visitors. It's urgent, please." The woman let him in grudgingly, and Robert took the stairs 2 at a time. He knocked on the door of 23. He waited. He knocked again. And then he heard footsteps on the other side. Helen opened the door in a dressing gown, her hair down, her eyes swollen from either too little sleep or too much crying. When she saw Robert, she froze. "Mr. Thorne, did something happen to Michael?" "No. I mean, yes. But not what you're thinking. He's fine. Physically, he's fine. But he's hurting. And I'm hurting, and I need to talk to you." Helen hesitated, but she opened the door. The flat was tiny. One room that served as both a bedroom and living room, a kitchenette, a bathroom. But it was clean, organized, with flowers in a bottle serving as a vase. There was dignity there, even in its simplicity. Robert stood, unsure how to begin. Helen sat on the bed, the only seating option besides the kitchen chair, and waited. "I read my father's letters," Robert began. "The letters about your mother, about the promise he made, about what he considered right. Your father was a good man. He was, and I'm not. At least, I haven't been until now. I was suspicious. I was harsh. I was unfair to you. I believed Arthur when he said you were dangerous. I believed Marcus when he said you were manipulating me. I believed everyone except the one person who deserved my trust. And now I'm here, humbled, alone, asking for a second chance I don't deserve." Helen remained silent. Robert continued, his voice breaking. "Michael has regressed. He stopped eating properly, stopped smiling, spends all day looking for you, and I tried, Helen, I swear I tried. I sat on the floor with him, I tried to play, I tried to do things the way you did. But I'm not you. I don't have your patience, your way, your gift. And I realized I don't need to, because I'm his father, and being a father is enough, but Michael needs you too, not as a replacement for anything, but as yourself, as Helen. And what do you want from me? I want you to come back, not as an employee, as family, as the person my wife chose to care for her son, as the person my father chose to be welcomed, as the person I finally choose to trust." Helen wiped away a tear that ran down her cheek. "And your brother? And your lawyer? And all the people who will keep saying I'm an opportunist?" Robert took an envelope from his pocket. Inside were documents. "I fired Arthur, and as for Marcus, I'll face him. I'll show him and everyone else that you are part of the Thorne family, not because you're trying to steal something, but because you were chosen, by my wife, by my father, and by me." He held out the envelope. Helen took it, opened it, and saw. They were documents for a foundation, the Mary Fisher and Marina Thorne Foundation, dedicated to supporting children with autism and their families. And in the bylaws, Helen was listed as the executive director. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not my money, it's ours. Yours, mine, Michael's. It's a legacy. It's a way to honor the two women who brought us to this point, your mother and my wife. And if you accept, we can do something that really matters. We can help other families, other children. We can turn pain into purpose." Helen cried. She truly cried without trying to hide it, and Robert sat beside her on the bed and cried too. Two strangers whom fate or life or some greater force had decided to connect in the most unlikely way. "I'll come back," she said finally, "but on one condition." "What is it?" "That you stop calling me Mr. Thorne. My name is Robert. Just that." Helen smiled through her tears. "Deal, Robert." They returned to the mansion together that morning. Michael was awake, in Celia's arms, when he heard the car arrive. He scrambled down in the uncoordinated way small children run, and when he saw Helen getting out of the car, he shouted. It wasn't a clear word, just a sound, but it was the most beautiful sound Robert had ever heard. And when Helen knelt with her arms open, and Michael ran to her, Robert saw exactly what she had said weeks ago. It wasn't replacement, it was completion. They were three people, each with their role, building something together. But the war with Marcus was not yet over. He returned the following week, this time with lawyers and official documents. He claimed Robert was emotionally unfit to lead the company. He presented commissioned psychological evaluations, distorted reports, manipulated employee testimonies. He wanted a full audit, an investigation into Robert's mental health, and in the best-case scenario, a division of power that would give him more control. Robert faced him in the construction company's boardroom, in front of the entire board. And for the first time in years, he spoke not as a businessman, but as a man. "Marcus is right about one thing. I went through a difficult time. I lost my wife. I struggled to connect with my son. I suspected those I shouldn't have and trusted those I shouldn't have. I made mistakes, many mistakes, but those mistakes taught me something that no MBA can teach. They taught me that leadership isn't about control. It's about humanity. It's about recognizing weaknesses, asking for help, accepting that we don't know everything." He looked around the room. The board members listened in silence. "Thorne Construction was built by my father on one principle: do what is right, not what is easy. And for years I forgot that. I focused on profit, on expansion, on market dominance. But now I want to return to that principle. I want this company to be known not only for the quality of its buildings, but for the social impact we create. And to that end, I am announcing the creation of the Mary Fisher and Marina Thorne Foundation. which will allocate a portion of our profits to support families with special needs children. Marcus tried to interrupt, but Robert raised his hand. And if Marcus thinks this is a sign of weakness, let him use his resources to try and remove me. But know this, all of you, I will not give up. I will not allow this company to become just another money-making machine. Because my father didn't build it for that, and my son will not inherit that. There was a long silence. Then, one of the oldest board members, who had worked directly with Michael Thorne Sr., stood up and began to applaud. Another joined in, and another, until the entire room was on its feet, applauding except for Marcus, who stormed out in a rage. He would try other attacks, Robert knew, but now he had something he didn't have before. He had purpose, he had allies, and he had Helen and Michael waiting at home, ready to be his reason to keep fighting. The following months were a time of rebuilding. Robert learned Michael's routine, his likes, his dislikes, his little rituals. He learned that the boy liked to line up cars before bed, that loud noises scared him, that hugs needed to be announced beforehand. And he also learned not to be afraid of making mistakes, because making mistakes with love was better than getting it right with distance. Helen took over as director of the foundation and soon turned it into a model of efficiency and care. She hired skilled professionals, established partnerships with hospitals and schools, and created support groups for parents. And every night, she returned to the mansion not as an employee, but as part of the life that happened there. Mrs. Celia, who saw everything with the eyes of someone who had known the Thornes for 20 years, said the house finally had a soul again, that the hallways laughed once more, that the light had come in through the windows. Michael, at 3.5, was already speaking single words. He called Robert Daddy. He called Helen Lena because it was the closest he could get. He ran through the garden, played with a dog Robert had bought on an impulse, and every night, at bedtime, he asked for both of them to stay in his room until he fell asleep. And they would stay. Robert on one side of the bed, Helen on the other, and Michael in the middle, holding both their hands. It was on one of those nights that Michael did something unexpected. He pulled Robert's hand to Helen's and joined them together. Then he smiled, satisfied, and closed his eyes. Robert and Helen looked at each other over his little head. They said nothing. They didn't need to, because they both knew that this simple scene of a boy uniting the two people he loved most was all that mattered. Marcus tried twice more to destabilize Robert. Once through anonymous tips to the press, another through a lawsuit questioning the foundation. But both failed. The Thorne family had a history. They had a reputation built over generations. And London society, which saw and judged everything, chose Robert's side. They chose the side of the beautiful story. The businessman who overcame personal tragedy, who opened his heart to a woman who had every reason to be just another employee, but chose to be more, and who was raising a special child with all the dedication in the world. On the foundation's first anniversary, they held an event. Families who had benefited brought their children. Children with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. Children's Society insisted on calling special, as if they needed an adjective to be validated. Robert gave a short speech. He said he had learned more from his son than in all his years of university. He said that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage, and that the greatest honor of his life was being Michael's father. Helen stood beside him, holding Michael. The boy, now 4, was already forming complete sentences. And when it was Helen's turn to speak, he wanted to as well. They took the microphone, lowered it to his height, and, Michael said in that deliberate, serious way that was all his own, "Mummy Marina is in heaven, but Lena is here, and Daddy too, and I have 2 families." The audience was moved. So were Robert and Helen. Because Michael understood. In his own way, to his own extent, but he understood. That love is not a limited quantity. That you can love many people at once. That family isn't just blood. It's choice. After the event, the 3 of them went to the cemetery. They brought fresh flowers and stood before Marina's grave. Robert hadn't been there in over a year, but he felt it was important. That Michael needed to know this place, to understand that his mother wasn't lost, she was just on another plane. Helen stood a few steps back, giving them space. But Michael called her over. "Lena, come. She's a mummy too." And Helen went, and the three of them stood there before that white marble headstone, and Robert was finally able to say what he needed to. "Marina, you chose right. You chose the right person to take care of him. To take care of me. It took me a long time to understand, a long time to accept, but now I know. And I promise I will honor your choice every day of my life." They returned home in the late afternoon. Michael fell asleep in the car, exhausted from the busy day. Robert carried him to his room, changed his clothes and covered him with the dinosaur print blanket, and as he was leaving, Helen was waiting for him at the door. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me, on Michael, on us." Robert smiled. "I should be the one thanking you." "Then we're even." "We are." They went downstairs together. Celia had already prepared dinner and was waiting for them at the table. They ate, talking about simple things, about the event, about Michael's speech, about the week ahead, about plans to take a trip to the coast for the holidays, their first trip as a trio. And when night fell completely, when Celia had retired and the house settled into that pleasant quiet that follows a day well lived, Robert and Helen stood on the terrace, looking at the lights of London in the distance, listening to the soft music coming from Celia's room, feeling the breeze that hinted at rain. "Do you think we can handle it?" Robert asked, raising him well, doing the right things. "I think we'll get a lot wrong," Helen replied, "but we'll get it wrong while trying, and that's already more than many people do." Robert agreed, and for the first time in years, since that terrible night at the hospital, he felt peace. Not the peace of someone who has all the answers. The peace of someone who accepts that not having answers is part of it. That life is made of attempts, mistakes, new beginnings. That what's important isn't perfection, but presence. Michael would grow up. He would have challenges ahead, some victories, some setbacks, but he would have a present father. He would have a maternal figure chosen by fate and by love. He would have a home full of people who truly cared. And in his room, as he slept surrounded by his stuffed dinosaurs, Michael dreamed. He dreamed of the beach, of sandcastles, of noisy waves. He dreamed of his father's voice reading stories. He dreamed of Helen's hug before bed. And he dreamed of a beautiful woman, one he couldn't quite remember but felt in his heart, blowing kisses from the sky. The silver locket Helen had received from her mother was now in a velvet box, along with other sentimental items. But the photograph from inside it had been enlarged and framed. It hung on the living room wall next to photos of Marina, of a young Michael, of happy family moments. A mosaic of stories, of generations, of people who had crossed paths, not by chance, but for a greater purpose. And when visitors asked about that old photograph, Robert would tell the story. He would tell them about his father, about Mary Fisher, about promises kept through the years. He would tell them about Helen, about Marina, about how two extraordinary women had shaped the man and the father he had become. And he would tell them about Michael, about how a boy with autism had taught them all the greatest lesson of all. That love doesn't need perfect words, it just needs an open heart and outstretched arms. 6 years after Helen's arrival at the mansion, the Mary Fisher and Marina Thorne Foundation was serving over 500 families. Michael, now 8, was in an inclusive school and had real friends. He still had his challenges, still needed support, but he was a happy child. And Robert, who had turned 48, looked back and saw not what he had lost, but what he had gained. He had gained a son he truly knew. He had gained a partner who taught him to trust again. He had gained a purpose that went beyond business. And on a Sunday morning, as the three of them were in the garden planting flowers Michael had chosen, the boy stopped, looked at them both, and said something no specialist had predicted, no therapy had guaranteed, but that happened simply because it was time. "I love you, both of you. Really, I do." Robert and Helen looked at each other, and without planning it, without rehearsing, they both answered in the same instant. We love you too, Michael. Really, we do. And there, in that sunlit garden, with their hands dirty with soil and their hearts full of gratitude, the family that fate had chosen to assemble in a most unconventional way was finally complete. Not by the absence of problems, but by the presence of true love. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Helen, and Michael has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, trust, and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that family is built with choices and courage. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with more stories that will make you reflect on the true values of life.